Hi, I'm Bobby Lloyd, the Chief Baking Officer for Magnolia Bakery, and today I'm going to teach you how to make our incredible red velvet banana pudding. It's a take on our classic pudding using, instead of the vanilla wafers, using red velvet cake. So more like a trifle, and it's absolutely delicious. Of course, we have to start with the red velvet cake. So red velvet cake has sort of a deep, dark history. There are many versions of where it came from and why we have red velvet cake. No one really knows the truth, but apparently it's an old-fashioned Southern recipe. It's got buttermilk in it, it's got red food coloring, it's got cocoa, which is, I would guess you would say, the secret ingredient, which means it's actually a chocolate cake. But you can see it's a very small amount of cocoa, so it's not a deep, dark chocolate flavor. But it's just a really beautiful cake, and in this banana pudding, it adds such an incredibly gorgeous layer of color to the contrast of the pudding itself, and of course little mini chocolate chips in there that give it a little extra crunch. This version of it, we're going to make it in a 9 by 13 pan, so that you end up with slices that we can layer in between the layers, obviously, of the pudding. So as we make our red velvet cake today, I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks along the way. For cakes, you always want to butter and flour a cake and then knock out any of the excess flour. So there's just a little bit in there that's a little extra. You just take the pan, hold it over a bowl or a garbage can or even the sink, just give it a couple of little taps, and any excess that isn't sticking to the butter will just drop off of the pan. So all of my ingredients are pre-measured here, and I like to use a scale for weighing to measure everything because it's very, very precise. Here we have our cake flour, and we're going to just gently whisk in some salt so that it's evenly blended. You don't have to sift the flour, but whisking it kind of loosens it up and lightens the flour a little bit. So you're going to set that aside once you've mixed it all together. In our stand mixer, which I prefer stand mixer, if you don't have one, you can do this with a hand mixer. It's just a lot more work and you can't walk away from it. We're going to cream our butter. And this is one of the little tips and tricks about butter, is you want to be sure that, number one, it's room temperature. And room temperature butter means that it's soft enough that it will blend, but not cold enough that it won't, and not so soft that it's melted. So you want to start your mixer on slow speed and give the butter the chance to just get creamy a little bit, and then turn it up to medium. You want to go, let the butter just completely soften and note that it's creamy. And once it starts to get like that, then you slowly add the sugar. When I say slowly, it means you only want to add enough as it takes it and mixes, and then add just a little bit more. The goal here is that the fat molecules in the butter are going to expand and they absorb the sugar, and sugar has water, as does butter. And when this cooks in the oven and it's fully creamed and fluffy butter, that will help your cake rise. Stop about halfway through, which we're going to do right now, and scrape down the sides of your bowl. Great thing about this bowl is that it's clear, so I can see when the butter is sticking on its own. But you want to make sure you get all the way down to the bottom, get every bit of butter off the sides of the bowl so it fully incorporates. And we'll add the rest of our sugar, and we're going to let that mix until it's super creamy. While that's mixing, I'll crack a couple of eggs. So I always like to crack my eggs into another bowl before adding it for two reasons. One, you don't get shell that way. And two, sometimes you get a bloody egg. They're just unappetizing. They're not going to hurt you, but they just don't look nice. So once this butter and sugar are completely creamed, and still has a little ways to go, I will add one egg at a time. And the egg process in itself should take about a full minute. You want to add the eggs slowly, and there's a reason for that, is you don't want it to break this emulsion that's created, and you'll see that in just a moment. I'm going to do one more scrape because I can see some of the butter and sugar is down in the bottom of the bowl. So making a cake batter, the concept of cakes is always the same. Cream the butter, add the sugar, add the eggs, add the dry with the wet alternately. That's pretty much the process of cake making. Each step along the way requires some patience, but you can see that that's coming together as a nice creamy blend of sugar and butter. Lovely. So now I'm going to turn my mixer speed down a little bit so that the egg doesn't splash all over the place. We'll add 1 egg, let it mix. And you see what happens the minute you add 1 egg, it starts to break the butter sugar blend a little bit, just a little bit. You don't want that to break too much. If you add the eggs too quickly, you'll end up, you can tell it looks curdled if it breaks too quickly. This is totally coming together beautifully. I don't have any shells in my batter because I cracked my eggs into a separate bowl. Once those are thoroughly mixed, it's about 20 seconds for each egg. Once it's come together, and you can even see right now that 1 egg I added broke it just a tiny bit, now it's coming back together. So once it's all mixed in and come back together, stop your mixer, and this will be the rule of all baking. Scrape the bowl again. 1 more mix. Let that come together. Great. The next step is to mix your cocoa powder and your red food coloring. Use a really good quality cocoa powder, 22 to 24% cocoa fat. Your cake will be much richer for that. Also, be sure that you sift it. There's no saving it after the fact with lumps and clumps if you didn't sift it beforehand. You'll note that I've got my red food coloring and my cocoa powder sitting on a separate tray. This is a little trick I do at home just to be sure that not 1 drop of red food coloring lands on my counter. It can ruin marble counters and other counters, and it doesn't go away, and it can stain your hands. So just add a little bit, stir it in thoroughly, and then continue to stir until it is completely blended. And this mixture is going to be added to our butter and sugar and egg mixture. And it's just this deep red chocolate, almost like bricks is the color. The original red velvet cakes back in the olden days, I don't know that anyone ever used beet juice for these, but they certainly used more of the cocoa to get that red color, and it was more of a brick color. The addition of the red food coloring really gives it a bright, bright red food color. And look at how awesome that is. And this is what makes our cake red. So now we're going to add the cocoa to our butter mixture, and just keep it on low because you don't want any splashing, and pour that in and let it completely come together. Isn't that an amazing color? It's fun to watch it. So, and of course, our last step, or our next step with adding any ingredient is scrape down the bottom and sides of the bowl. You want to be absolutely certain that all the bits and parts are mixed together. So in this instance, we'll lift again. I'm also going to take the paddle off and scrape down the paddle because I want to be sure this is all one cohesive color with no blobs of butter and sugar hanging out. And the great thing is with all this color in here, you can see when it's not perfectly coming together. Now we're going to add vanilla to our buttermilk. Just give it a quick little whisk so they're blended together. It'll come together in the batter as well. And as with most cakes, or almost all cake batters, you will add the wet and the dry alternately to this mixture, to your butter mixture, starting and ending with your dry. And that last mix of adding the last third of our dry is when it all comes together. And mixer on low so it doesn't splatter all over you. Mix until there are no more, only just light streaks of the white flour. You don't want to overmix a cake batter. So it's about little bits of streaks left. That kind of looks perfect. The last step again is 1 more round of scraping. Like I said, you can't scrape too much. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It's my motto when making cakes. So scrape the bottom, get it all the way up, make sure there's no butter or flour stuck anywhere. And then the last round of mixing on low speed is really only about 10 seconds. So it doesn't need much. It's really come together. And voila, you have red velvet cake batter. The very last step is where we get to have a little bit of fun. We're going to add the apple cider vinegar to baking soda. And you know what happens when you do that? Baking soda makes that volcano. It's like every kid's science project. And this reaction gets dumped into the batter. And 1 more round of mixing and then scraping. And voila, we will have cake. Red velvet cake. Vinegar is an interesting ingredient in a cake. Again, this is this history of the red velvet cake. It's always been in there. It's that reaction with the soda. It also brings, you saw I don't know if you noticed it, but the color actually changed a little bit. So the reaction of that vinegar and soda heightens up the color of the red velvet batter. Isn't that beautiful? And the last step is obviously just scrape it all down, and we're gonna add it to our pan. So evenly fill your pan. Then you're going to spread it around so it's even across from one end to the other. And before putting it into the oven, I do one last little special trick, is just give it 1 or 2 taps on the counter. That helps to eliminate any potential big air bubbles. Won't flatten or deflate your cake in any way, but it does help. And be sure to get every bit of that batter out of there. And I'm using a ceramic pan, as you can see here, but you can use aluminum pans are best, 9x13 pans. And we're ready to bang our pan. 1, 2, that's about it. Goes in the oven. Should take about 40 to 45 minutes. You want to test for doneness. 3 things you look for. 1 is it starts to smell like cake. You'll know it's ready because you go, it smells like cake. 2 is it'll start to pull away from the pans just a tiny bit. And the 3rd one is sticking a toothpick into the center of your cake. And if it comes out clean, your cake is done and ready to go. So, in the oven. So our cake is fully baked and cooled. You want to let it cool for at least 30 minutes, but you can certainly make this cake a day ahead of time. Once it's completely cooled, we are going to prep for making it in our trifle bowl, or you can make your pudding in a pan like this, which is even better. The rule is to cut this in half, and then halves again. I like to mark it first, so it's 4 by 2. So once you've marked it, cut it fully. Now you may not end up using all of the cake for your trifle bowl. You're only putting 2 layers of cake in the trifle bowl. If you were making a 9 by 13 pan of banana pudding, you might use a little bit more of it. But once you cut the slices into this size, then you want to take that slice and you want to cut it in half. So get all your slices prepared and ready to go. Don't slice your slices too early ahead of time because they will dry out. You can certainly just make your cake, wrap it up, save it, or freeze it even if you want to do that till the next day. And we're ready to start making our banana pudding. Now we're going to start making our banana pudding. There's 2 parts to banana pudding. We call this pudding part 1, which is making the base. Super easy. Sweetened condensed milk, water, and instant Jell-O brand vanilla pudding. Can't get much easier than that. Just take your Jell-O pudding and put it in a medium to large bowl. Then you're going to take the sweetened condensed milk and water and mix them together in one bowl. Make sure you get all the sweetened condensed milk out of the can, because that is like liquid gold. And this is what helps our part 1 to have its body and thickness. This is going to take about at least a half an hour in the refrigerator to set. But I say usually make it ahead of time so you don't have to worry about it. Make it the morning of, make it the night before, and just whisk it gently together until it's completely combined. And you'll notice that I used a bowl big enough that I'm not going to splash and spill all over the place. I have made that mistake myself of grabbing a bowl that was too small, because the sweetened condensed milk, as you can see, is very thick. So it takes a moment just to get it homogenized and mixed together. So gently, gently mix, but once it all comes together, you can kind of feel there's no more resistance, and you're good to go. Perfect. Then we take this mixture, the liquid, and slowly pour it into our pudding. So, and slowly is super important. Add a little bit and mix. Add a little bit and mix. This is your opportunity to make sure you have no lumps and clumps. If you add the liquid too quickly, you'll end up with a lot of lumps and clumps, and you don't want that. You want this to be really nice and smooth. So I'm even going to put that down for a second, scrape it with my whisk, really get into it, kind of work out the bumps. See how smooth that is? Now I can add more liquid. And that once you get to that point of smoothness and it's absorbing the the liquid, you're fine. You can add it a little bit faster. Once you get it all in there, use your whisk to kind of scrape your bowl. And same thing, whisk sort of rubbing the sides of the bowl to get all the mixture cohesive. Whisk it around a little bit. Get a nice piece of plastic wrap. Don't touch the surface of it, just lay it over your bowl and straight into the refrigerator for a minimum of a half an hour. So now we have our chilled, what we call the part one. You can see it's thick. That's exactly what we want. So for this particular banana pudding, which is the red velvet banana pudding, we like to mimic the flavor of the fantastic icing, which is a cream cheese icing, or whipped vanilla with the way we do it at Magnolia. But a cream cheese icing, we're going to use some very softened cream cheese and place it into a mixer bowl. And you want to make sure it's soft and room temperature, and stick it in the mixer. And it might take a couple minutes to get it fully blended. I want to start out with, I'm going to turn this up to high for a second. You want to start the cream cheese first on a medium to high whip, just to get it soft and blended. Because now we're going to add that part one to this mixture. And once it's soft and blended, we will take our trusty scraper and scrape down the sides. We'll add a little bit, again, on high, because high speed is better because it gets the cream cheese off of your whisk. On a slow, there you go. Now it's starting to super cream. Perfect. Now you can do on a low speed. So on a lower speed, I'm going to add large spoonfuls or spatulas full of the part one, the pudding mixture. And now this will get that tangy cream cheese flavor blended into it. Once you get all your ingredients incorporated, you're going to stop your mixer and you're going to scrape it down. As you can see, we got a blob of cream cheese right there in the middle. Fully scrape the bottom. Here we go. Go. And you can whip it on high, which is fine. It won't hurt it. Beautiful. Again, you can do this ahead of time. This can go back into the refrigerator, or you can just lay it on the counter as you prepare the next step. Next part is to make the pudding part two, which is whipped cream. Making heavy, take 3 cups of heavy cream, and you want to make sure you get a really good quality one. Be sure all of your ingredients are really cold. Cold bowl, cold whisk, cold beaters if you're doing it by hand or with a hand mixer, and start on slow. Heavy cream, everyone thinks it's super easy to make whipped cream, and there are some things that can actually go wrong. Starting on a high speed means you're going to get splashed. You want to start on a low speed. You'll start to see some large bubbles form. As the bubbles form, you can raise the speed a little bit before it starts splashing you, and keep a very close eye on it. Getting to the point of stiff peaks can take 4 to 5 minutes, but you can very easily go from perfectly whipped cream to butter. So as we get closer and closer, and you can see now the bubbles are starting to get smaller. So I'm going to turn the speed up again just a little bit, and it's starting to splash somewhat. It'll start to thicken, and I watch it closely, and as it thickens, then I'll turn the speed up a little bit more again, but not until I see it starting to thicken. So I've been whipping this cream, and you can see now it's starting to come together as a nice thick whipped cream. You can see the lines forming in it. Once I get to this point, I turn my mixer off. I take a quick look at it. Is it holding a stiff peak? And if it is holding a stiff peak, beautiful. Literally from this point, if you went another 10 seconds, you might end up with butter. So keep a super close eye on it. So now the fun part begins. We are going to add our cream cheese pudding mix. Big spoonful at a time on medium to low speed. Let it mix in, and then add another spoonful. And just keep going until you've got it all added to the heavy cream. And as always, my rule is, I like to all say it together, scrape the sides and bottom of the bowl, making sure everything is thoroughly incorporated. Once I've got all the part one in there, I give it a little boost of energy, go up a couple of notches, whip it for maybe 30 seconds. This is looking really good. The last step is I'm going to scrape, scrape, scrape. Make sure it's thoroughly mixed. As you can see, there's a lot of white still, which means that's just the heavy cream. But I want all of those to be together, thoroughly blended. Almost want to dive in, it's so smooth and creamy. So that looks great. We are ready to assemble. So now we've got all the components made for our red velvet banana pudding. We've got our cake, we got our pudding mixture, and we're going to assemble in a trifle bowl. I also like to use some mini chocolate chips to give it a little bit of texture, and of course our bananas ready to go. Using a large scoop because it's much easier to do this. If you don't, a spoon is fine, but I usually take about 1 large, maybe 2 scoops on the bottom of the bowl, and I just use the back of the scoop to kind of push it around to the edge of the bowl. To have this look the best and be really beautiful between the layers, make sure you're showing the cut edge of the cake out to the edge like that. And you can fill in little bits and pieces if you've got edges that don't make it quite to the edge of the bowl. Just break some of the cake and add it. You can break your pieces in half if you need to. So the goal is to really make it look beautiful all the way to the edge of the bowl. You're going to do this 3 times as you go through the layering. It gets the cake, then it gets bananas, then it gets some mini chocolate chips, and last but not least, more pudding, and then you repeat everything. Usually about 1 banana per layer, and just slice them so that they're all over the layer, about a little under 1/4 of an inch thick. So make sure that your bananas smell nice and ripe, that they're not green bananas. You want to have flavor, because once you open a banana, that's it. It won't ripen anymore. It is ripened. And sometimes it takes a little bit more than 1 banana. In this case, because I want to have my layer fully covered. There we go. Spread them out. And about 2 tablespoons, 1/4 cup over the top of mini chips. And then you're going to add more pudding. I hope you enjoyed making the red velvet banana pudding with me today. It's one of my absolute favorites, and it's in the new Magnolia Bakery handbook. Thank you.